Hi, it's Isabel, and today I want to film the first of what will probably be a little series of videos where for each season I want to recommend to you some books that I think would be perfect to read during that season. And I'm obviously going to start with the season that is coming up, which is winter. And I'm going to split this video into two parts. So in the first part I will talk about some books that I've already read and really enjoyed and that I think would be for some reason perfect to read during winter. And then in the second part I'm going to talk about some of the books that I have on my own TBR that I want to get to this winter. So without further ado, let's get into the books. My first recommendation is a classic, and it is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And I feel like many people think of this as more of an autumnal read because it is gothic and kind of creepy in places. But to me, this has always felt like a winter read because of the setting. Because many parts of this are set in cold places, for example, the Swiss mountains or even the Arctic. And that's why I always get kind of a wintry feel when reading this. And I also just feel like winter is the perfect time to curl up with a cup of hot chocolate or tea and read a classic. My next recommendation is also set in a cold place, and it is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. And this one is about a group of people on a train who have been snowed in that train. And in classic Agatha Christie fashion, a murder happens and you know that it must have been one of the passengers because they have been snowed in, so they're very isolated. And in this one, the famous Detective Poirot investigates the case and tries to figure out who was the murderer before the train drives on. I think I've mentioned before that I just generally really like reading murder mysteries in winter because they're kind of cozy and you can guess along with them. And I think this one in particular, because of the setting, is absolutely perfect as a winter read. I've just realised that I think all of my recommendations are set in cold places, and that's probably why I recommend them as winter reads. So not surprisingly, the next one is also set in a cold place. It is set in Poland in winter in a kind of small community, and it is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by, I always struggle, sorry, by Olga Tokarczuk, I think is how you pronounce it. So this book, as I said, is set in a really tiny community in Poland, and again there is a murder that happens. Basically you follow the protagonist, who is an elderly woman who is one of the few people who remain in the village during winter because most people only go there for their summer holidays, and she's kind of looking after different cabins, and one of her few neighbours is found dead. This one, however, is less of a murder mystery and I would say more of a character exploration of the protagonist. What I really enjoyed about this book is that it also has very strong nature themes, so the nature surrounding them, the animals, etc, have a really kind of big influence on the story, and it almost has that kind of folklore feeling to it. So I think if you're looking for something more fairy tale like but also very much set in the real world and also dealing with a lot of real world harshness and problems, this would be a great winter read. My next recommendation deals with the harshness of nature even more than the last ones, and it is The Revenant by Michael Punke. And this one is set in, I always have to look it up, the 1820s, and it follows a trapper who has been left for dead by his group after he has been attacked by a bear. But he survives, and the book basically follows him as he is trying to get back to civilization to then pursue the men who have left him behind. And because this one is set in the Rocky Mountains, it of course has a lot of snow and darkness and cold weather all around. It's also quite harsh because this guy is left alone in nature, basically without any tools, and then has to try and survive. So while I certainly wouldn't like to be outside and nearly freeze in the snow, I do tend to enjoy books about that kind of thing. And then finally, I of course couldn't make a video recommending books that are set in cold places without mentioning my favourite, which is The Blue Fox by Sjón. This one also has a historical setting. I think it's set in the 1880s, so a bit later than The Revenant. And this one is set in Iceland. It features a snowstorm. Somebody goes out in a snowstorm and gets trapped in the snow, which I think is a really interesting part of the book. This one also has a lot of magical realism and transformations. It also is in part written in kind of short vignettes, and I think those are actually my favourite parts. I always struggle to kind of explain the plot of this one, but it's partly about a hunter who goes out to hunt a blue fox, but it's also partly about a naturalist who has taken in a woman with, I think, autism. It's also partly about her life story, and all of these different strands really intricately tie together, and it is revealed throughout the book what connections exist between all of these characters. So this one I think would be a perfect winter read for everybody who's looking for something more poetic and magical, and it's a really short one. You could read it in like one evening, and I think it would be lovely to do that actually. So those are the books that I would recommend to you based on that I've already read and really enjoyed them. I am now getting into the books that I personally want to read this winter. Though actually the first one is also one that I've already read, but I really want to reread it this winter, and it is Children of the Cave by Virve Sammalkorpi. And this one is translated from, I think, Finnish. But this one isn't actually set in Finland, it's set in Russia, and again it is set in the 1800s, and it follows a group of explorers who go to Russia to... I actually don't know what they originally wanted to investigate, but either way they find this cave where childlike people live in. And it is very much about one of these explorers who forms kind of a relationship with these people. And it focuses a lot on how explorers during that time saw different people that they found during their explorations and how they interacted with them. This was one of my favourite books from last year, which is why I would really like to reread it this year. And I think the setting, again, just makes it a very wintry read. Then I actually have one that isn't set in a cold place, which is because it doesn't have a setting at all, because it's a poetry collection, and it's Ariel by Sylvia Plath. And it might just be that this cover really reminds me of the other winter reads I have, because, let me show you, I've just realised that most of my winter recommendations are light blue or like turquoise. There must be something about that. Either way, so this kind of fits in with the colour, and maybe that's why it gives me winter vibes. But I also just really felt like reading a poetry collection during winter, and I've always wanted to give Sylvia Plath a try, and I know that Ariel is one of her most famous collections. So I'm gonna start with this one. And then we're back with books that have a cold setting, because the next one that I want to read is At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. And this one is Antarctic cosmic horror. And that's about all I know about it. I, again, like with Sylvia Plath, have always wanted to try H.P. Lovecraft, and I really liked the premise of this one, because it's about a group of explorers going to the Antarctic to do, I think, some drilling, and I think what they find is kind of alien creatures, something like that. I have read the first kind of few pages, and so far I really like the writing style, so yes, I'm looking forward to hopefully getting to this one this winter. Then I have two books I don't have a physical copy of yet. The first one is Hag. And I think I've talked about this one before, and it is a short story collection with modern takes on fairy tales and folk tales from the British Isles. So it's an anthology containing loads of different female British authors who have written stories for this collection. I really like fairy tales and folk tales. I think winter is especially a good time to read them because of the long dark nights, and many fairy tales and folk tales obviously also have that in them, and they have the kind of mysterious, creepy vibes. So that's why I want to really get to this collection during winter. And then the last book that I want to read is non-fiction, and it is Beneath the Night by Stuart Clark. And this one is all about the stars and the night sky and humanity's relationship with it. And I think it sounds really fascinating because I am always fascinated when I look up at night and I see all of these stars and imagine that people for thousands of years have done the same, and I really want to learn more about that. So I think this is the perfect book to find out about that. And as I said, winter is kind of the time of where it's always night, or at least it feels like it. It's not really true. I mean, we do have a good few hours of day, but there's a lot of darkness and a lot of watching the night sky, so I think now would be the perfect time to learn more about the night sky. And those are all the books I had to talk about today. I hope you found some books that you might be interested in reading this winter as well. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!